VLR.
This is Politinerds Radio with your hosts, Jazz Shaw and Doug Mataconis.
Welcome back to Politinerds Radio number 3. Tonight, we're going to be talking with Mr. John Philip Souza III, who is running the Run, Ben, Run Super PAC, attempting to get Dr. Ben Carson into the 2016 presidential race. And Doug, he's got quite a history.
Dr. Carson has, yes. I mean, he started out, he's very well known as a top neurosurgeon, pediatric neurosurgeon, no less, at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, where he ultimately was head of the neurosurgery department for quite a long period of time. And then his name has come up in politics before. He was briefly mentioned as a potential candidate for lieutenant governor when Bob Ehrlich actually was running for governor many years ago, but he declined that position and stayed in medicine. And he's become more famous recently as a very outspoken critic of the Affordable Care Act in general, and of the Obama administration itself. And we will be right back with our interview with John Philip Souza III here on Politinerds Radio.
A progressive woman once told me that if she was my wife, she'd poison my coffee. I told her if I was her husband, I'd drink it. This is Alan Bordius, host of Their Finest Hour, Monday nights here on Vigilant Liberty Radio.
Hi, this is Mary Chastain of Breitbart News, and you're listening to Vigilant Liberty Radio.
Welcome back to Politinerds, and we are here with our guest this evening, Mr. John Philip Souza, and he is a representative and member of the Super PAC Run, Ben, Run, as we were discussing during the intro, who will be trying to coax well-known at this point, I would say, Doug and renowned neurosurgeon, Dr. Ben Carson, into the 2016 race for the presidency. Mr. Souza, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Doug, I'm going to just go over a little bit of the background first of why we were originally, shall I say, enticed to have Mr. Souza on the show. And that was because not too long ago, I had published an article at Hot Air, which, and I hope, I open the floor to you in a moment, sir. I don't think it was in any way defamatory towards Dr. Carson or to the Super PAC. I was talking about some news that was made by the Run, Ben, Run Super PAC. Basically, this is a bit outside of our normal experience. We're talking about a group that has organized, and very well organized, if I may give a little tip of the hat to you, raised quite a bit of money, a very direct focus, but at the same time appears to be not in any way directly related to the, at this point, potential candidate. So I guess, why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about what are the goals of the Run, Ben, Run Super PAC? And, beyond that, why would people interested in supporting it want to support the PAC instead of working directly and supporting Dr. Carson?
Well, let's see. To just respond to your kind of intro there, we are a super PAC, and by law, we are forbidden to have any affiliation with Dr. Carson or his people or his committee, with his staff. We're not allowed to give him advice, give him suggestions, coordinate marketing or advertising with him. So by the very nature of our entity, we are not coordinated or affiliated with Dr. Carson. And if we were to do that, then I would go to jail, and I have really no desire in the world to do that at my old age of near 70. So with that being said, for probably the first 14, 15 months, if you wanted to encourage Dr. Carson to run for president, then ours was the only organization for you to support. And we have raised quite a bit of money, about $13 million. We have over 150,000 individual donors. We have 25,000 volunteers, active volunteers around the country. We are ramping up to have almost 50 staff people, including interns, paid staff around the country. So we have become quite a viable organization with the very, very targeted goal of getting Dr. Ben Carson into the White House as our next president. But that gets done in steps, right? You've got to convince him to run number one. And then number two, as a super PAC, we will support, not coordinate with, but we will support the efforts of his official committee. So I hope that better kind of explains or helps you better understand of kind of us versus them, if you will.
Absolutely. Let me, with that, turn that over to my partner, Doug Mataconis.
And related to the article that Jazz posted in December, and again, we're not bringing you on here to do third degree. This isn't, 60 minutes and I'm not morally safer, but there was a comment in one of the links that Jazz had linked to that stood out to me personally. And it quoted Armstrong Williams, who, as you know, is very close to Dr. Carson, as saying that it was, and I don't know when this comment was made, and if I tried to do a little bit of research to see if there's been any further comment on his part, but where he said that to his mind, it seemed like the super PAC was working for the benefit of the super PAC rather than Dr. Carson, and I wonder, obviously keeping in mind the legalities you bring up, which I understand perfectly, I wonder, how you'd respond to that.
Well, listen, Armstrong is a very long, old, dear friend of Dr. Carson's, and we believe he's very protective of Dr. Carson. We've never had any communications with Armstrong for the reasons that, I just mentioned a moment ago. Would we be safe in talking to Armstrong since Armstrong's not related to the campaign? Maybe, but I'm not taking that risk. And quite frankly, our legal people have suggested that we not take that risk. So I can assure you and I can assure Armstrong that our only desire is to encourage Dr. Carson to run for the presidency, and if he then decides to do that, to support him, Dr. Carson, in any way, shape, or form that we legally are allowed to do. Now, every presidential candidate has a super PAC, at least one. And if you look at recent quotes by Terry Giles, Dr. Carson's official campaign manager, Terry Giles said, and I don't want to misquote him here, but he said he was very grateful for all the work we had done and all the exposure we've gotten, Dr. Carson, and the enormous fundraising list that we've been able to build, and the volunteers, and on and on and on. And if it wasn't for our efforts, those things wouldn't exist today.
And how long exactly have you been in operation?
We had our first kind of informal meeting in August of 2013. And it was at that point we decided to test the water with a 75,000-piece test mailing to see whether, we were on the right track or the wrong track. And both you gentlemen have been around long enough to know if you do a test mailing, you're absolutely going to lose money. Test mailings just don't make money. This one made money, and it made pretty big money. And we knew as a result of that, Dr. Carson was someone who the American people really wanted to take a closer look at.
Apparently, a lot of your fundraising, and I know this is pretty common at this early stage of any campaign, has been direct mail fundraising, and there's a lot of overhead associated with that.
There is a ton of overhead.
Yes.
Believe me, I wish there were a cheaper, more efficient way to A, raise money, and B, get the exposure for Dr. Carson. But today there is not. Now, with that said, I think we probably have been as efficient as any other political organization in the country, maybe except for Obama, in building our email list. And we have a very, very hearty email list and great supporters. And of course, if you send an email out versus, a U.S. postage piece with, say, a book in it or a pamphlet or a bumper sticker or whatever else, the cost is tremendously less than the direct mail. But you've got to do the direct mail.
Right. Now, what happens? What happens? What happens if Dr. Carson ultimately decides he isn't going to run, or he drops out early? I mean, what is this? I mean, have you? I mean, I don't want to tell. I mean, you don't have to go into detail, I guess, but is that something you've at least given some thought to as to where what the future of the super PAC would be at that point?
Well, it's a really good question. It's one that we have not, as an organization, as a group, as a board, really talked about. Because our focus, and I don't want to sound like, the ball player that says, we're only focused on the next game. We could care less about the World Series. But our true focus is Dr. Carson. Now, if Dr. Carson wakes up tomorrow morning, or Candy, his wife, wakes up and says, we're not doing this. This is just too much work, and you're supposed to be retired, and I want us to spend more family time as opposed to saving the country, then as an organization, we will have